Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, all good. So yeah, thank you for joining us today. We're going to go through a variety of stress-based topics, and we've got some fabulous guest speakers as well. So for those of you who don't know us, we are Bhayani HR and Employment Law, and we're a niche firm that just specialises in HR and employment. And like the slide says, a one-stop shop for all of your people management issues. In terms of how we usually help clients, the most popular solution is our watertight fixed fee package. And we've got a variety of different retainer packages that most of you will probably know about that are aimed at business owners and HR managers. And they're also widely popular in the third sector as well. So if anybody wants to know a bit more about that, then just let me know. So let's get straight into it. We've got quite a lot to get through today. So the situation at present then, since COVID, you'd like to think that things had calmed down somewhat. However, we can still see here that there's still a large proportion of people in work that are really struggling with their mental and physical well-being. And from an advisory perspective, we're still dealing with lots of stress-related issues daily, both from an absence point of view and a performance management point of view. And I don't think that's going to go away, unfortunately, especially with home working and the complications that that brings. So in terms of what actually underpins performance, so I've sort of put together a few things that, for me, working in HR, underpin a culture of good or bad performance. And a critical one is job descriptions and person specifications. So unfortunately, time and time again, we see that businesses don't have them in place, or when they do, they're perhaps really outdated and useless. And fundamentally, these documents underpin, what a person is expected to do in their job. And the person specification defining what they need to be like as a person while at work. So I think if you don't have these, annual appraisals is probably a really good time to revisit them. And it's not that you want people to work to rule, it's just that it's really good for people to refer to and know what's expected of them, and you can use them in one-to-ones to guide people. And on feedback and supervision, so for me, this should take place through a one-to-one, and one-to-one should be happening, regularly, on time. Don't leave people waiting or cancelling them if you can help it. And these are for good performance as well. It's not just about nipping bad performance in the bud. It's about rewarding good performance, and that plays a huge part in employee well-being. And if people don't know that they're doing well, that can lead to insecurity and people thinking about jumping ship, which you really don't want at the moment. And with more formal feedback and supervision, so probation reviews and appraisals, it's really important that probation reviews aren't just there as something that hangs over an employee where there's no communication and they're left wondering, are they going to keep me? Are they going to get rid of me? Reviews need to be happening every week during the probation period, and they need to be documented. So it's not war and peace, it's just a case of having those meetings, making sure that everything's okay, making sure that they've had enough training, what's going on across the organisation, and that will then feed into your one-to-ones and appraisals after that. Appraisals need to be happening regardless of the organisation size. If you've got one employee, if you've got 500, appraisals need to be happening. And it's always a really good thing to link them to pay and other reward as well. And it's not something that you can just get off the shelf. You need to be designing a bespoke appraisal process linked to your values and, your business strategy. And thinking about sort of checks of work. So how can feedback be given if work isn't being checked? And I think that, it happens quite a lot when you've got people that are really competent. They're just left to get on with things. Their work isn't checked. And it's often not until there's a problem that work starts getting checked. and the impact that that has on someone's well-being when they've been really autonomous for ages and then suddenly people start combing through their work. You know, the impact is so negative. It needs to be happening from the start, and if it isn't, you need to creep it in quite gradually, you know, so that it doesn't feel like a sudden, why is someone suddenly checking my work? You know, I'm second guessing myself, you know, I feel like I have to come to them all the time to ask questions. It should be happening all the time, you know, by line managers. And it's important that line managers delegate tasks to free up their time so that they can do this. Because, you know, if somebody isn't getting regular feedback from their manager and then suddenly they're put on a performance improvement plan, that's when you're likely to get severe stress and absence as a result. And you don't want the insecurity of someone not knowing if they're doing a good job either. Now, client and customer feedback, I would say it's really important that this is communicated. So, for example, internally at Bhayani Law, when we get a new review, when an advisor gets a review, our managing director will share that with the whole team and say, this person's got a review, well done, and everyone can celebrate that together. And it's really important that that's done, I think, so that company-wide people feel like they've been acknowledged for their hard work. And co-worker and colleague feedback. So this can really slide when people are working at home. And I think that people do a lot of learning on the job when they're actually communicating with team members, because they might say, well, I'm doing this particular way, and their colleague might give them an insight and say, well, actually, I'd do it like this. You know, and vice versa, and people bounce off each other. So I think if someone, you know, is new, if it is a new starter, then make sure that those calls are set up and they're speaking to their colleagues, they're speaking to their team, and make sure that regular catch-ups are scheduled. And to some extent, that is the responsibility of managers, to make sure that the home workers are speaking to each other. You know, make sure that they're checking in, and, you know, get a Friday afternoon Teams call set up or something. So going back to the one-to-ones, which I know I've already spoken about a lot already, but these are really, really important for me, because, you know, for these to be happening every few weeks, it means that any issues are not going to be a surprise. And there should be sort of two parts to a one-to-one. Now, this is a document that I personally really like, and this is the first part of it. So this is quite factual. It's talking about objectives. You know, it's talking about, has it been met? Has it not? If not, what are the barriers? What are the action points? It's a chance to find out if there's more training needed. And this is the second part to that. And what I really like about this type of one-to-one form, you know, it's nothing glamorous. It's just a very basic document that you can write in, but it can't be too onerous, otherwise people, you know, managers just don't have the time to fill them in. With this, it's just a set of open questions. So it gives the employee a chance to guide the way that meeting goes, because sometimes those one-to-ones might be about the job or about clients, customers, what's going wrong. And other times those meetings might just be about their well-being. And you don't necessarily want to sit down with them and go, how's your mental health? You know, how are you? Have you got any problems? But if you just say to them, how has your last month been? You know, how's it gone? Is there been anything bad, anything good, anything you want to talk about? And areas for improvement doesn't necessarily just mean on the job. It means, you know, how have they been managing their workload? How have they been managing themselves and, you know, regulating their emotions? It can be about anything. So, you know, it's just a really good chance for you to, you know, set things straight. And I'd recommend that these are done every 2 weeks. You know, it doesn't need to be any more than that, unless there's issues. But, you know, every 2 weeks, a check-in, a documented check-in, so that if there are issues in the future, you've got a really good record of things that have been spoken about. Now, when things go wrong, so performance improvement plans have got a really bad name as being a gateway to being sacked. And there's no denying it, sometimes that is the case. But usually, you know, this is the idea of these, is it's the first stage before a formal process. It does fall into your formal process, but there's no reason for it to feel as negative, you know, as it usually does. So usually I'd recommend that it's renamed when people are implementing them. So, you know, it could be called, you know, action plan, it could be personal development plan. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, you getting put on a PIP, because if you land that, you know, on somebody, highly likely they're going to go off sick or not cooperate. It's really going to, you know, get their hackles up, and you know, it'll be a downward spiral from there. So it's all about how you introduce it and using the right language. And a lot of the time it's, you know, just about being quite factual and saying these things aren't being done, we want to make sure that they are. How can we do that together? Let's put together a plan. You don't want to be sitting down and going, you know, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. If this doesn't happen, you know, we're going to take you through a capability procedure. That comes later. PIP plans are ideally so that isn't needed. So when you're actually having the conversation, body language is a huge thing, and the way that you speak to somebody. I would say that most of the grievances or complaints that we deal with are because of managers and management style and friction. You know, people just not seeing eye to eye, people not getting on, or managers not amending their style to suit individuals within their team. And this isn't meant to seem patronising, but I think that sometimes these things are forgotten. You know, be seen to be taking notes when someone's talking in a meeting. You know, write down what they're saying, look interested, stay relaxed. Don't interrupt and go, oh, but, you know, what about this or what about that? You know, wait for them to finish and make them feel heard. And in terms of the don'ts, so what can be really easy to do, I think, for managers is when they're under an immense amount of pressure themselves, they can project their own problems onto that person. So if that person says, I'm really struggling to get this work done, the manager's probably thinking, well, I'm struggling, you know, the rest of the team are because of your underperformance. All of these things will be running through their head. Don't make your problems their problems. Just listen to what they've got to say. And you can explain the implications, you know, you can explain what's going on in the wider team. But a lot of the time, you know, if you bring in other issues, that person just ends up not feeling heard, and the meeting won't be productive. So try not to be over anxious and showing too much emotion. And try and listen with an open mind, because, you know, just because you think that that person isn't doing very well, some people just are not open with, you know, with what's going on, or a lot of the time with their own incompetency. If someone's really struggling with something, they're not going to find it easy to say to you, you know what, actually I can't do that, because they'll be worried, thinking, oh well, that's it then, you know, they're going to get rid of me, or they're already not happy with me, so I don't want to admit or they're failing. So it's important that you do listen with an open mind and you give them a chance to be honest and encourage that, because if you shut it down, the conversation will just end. So thinking a bit more about that, these points are all really important. So in terms of location, you know, make sure that is in private. And I would say that if, you know, say for example, one-to-one meetings aren't something that happens regularly in your organisation. If you go and sit in a glass conference room in an office and those meetings don't often happen, that is not in private. I would try and organise that for the end of the day. You know, just say to that person, you're okay to stop behind for 15, 20 minutes. You know, really think about how appropriate it's going to be. And, you know, if that conversation is going to be quite tense and you're in a room in the middle of an office where everyone can see in, just because people can't hear doesn't mean that, you know, the effects aren't still felt by that employee. And try and make sure it's at the end of the day. That's what I always say. If you're going to have a difficult conversation, don't expect them to then come and sit at the desk and get on with their work. Really think about the timing of it. And with the time, try not to rush. Don't just put a 20-minute slot in when you've got a meeting right after. And I know that can't be helped, but it's better to just do it another day, because if you're constantly clock watching when someone's speaking to you, it's not going to be productive. You know, they're not going to be honest. You're not really going to get through the issues, and that's when things sort of get brushed under the carpet a bit. And like I said a minute ago, just make sure that both people have got some breathing space after, after the meeting, because they're not easy. So in terms of knowing that what you're doing is right, it can be really hard sometimes when you've got, say, stress-related issues. Someone might have had absence, they're not performing, you've had a few conversations but they're quite informal. It can be really hard to know if what you're doing is right. Shall I put them on an improvement plan? Should we go to capability? It can be really, really difficult, and I know that. So what I would do, and this is what I always tell clients when they come to me about performance issue, is prepare. So whether that's coming to take advice from someone, whether that's, chatting to another manager, establish the facts. So don't just base this off a feeling, I've got a feeling that this isn't being done, or this isn't being done quick enough. Try and get some facts and figures. How quickly do other people in the team do a particular task, or when should something have been completed? Don't go back, months and months and months. Try and keep things regular, but establish the facts. It can't just be based on your feeling or your opinion. And reflect on what you know. Take some advice if you can, and get some support, because when you're in an organization every day and you're working with that person, you can get blinded, I think, to what the reality is, because that problem is affecting you. And I know that it can just be really difficult to see the wood for the tree sometimes. Check your policies. So have you got a capability policy? Have you got a performance management policy? Whatever it might be called, check that you've got one. And if not, use the ACAS website. Use the code of practice for disciplinaries and grievances, because even if it's not a disciplinary, those steps really help you to, to guide your process with that person. So a lot of the time, I'll always refer back to that and say, have you investigated? Have you collected the evidence? Have you spoken to the person, given them time to respond to what the issues are? Sometimes it's really good to just go back to basics. And like I said before, don't make your issues their issues. Be prepared to be provoked. They're going to say things which are going to annoy you as a manager, but don't shut them down. They're going to try and defend themselves, aren't they? Just try and keep focused at the issues at hand and overcoming those. So, listen to what they've got to say in defense, but just say, right, okay, how can we move forward? Ultimately, this is what needs to be done. How can we do that together? And yeah, just make sure you're following the right steps in a process. It's not going to be great if you've got a process, a policy, procedure, whatever it may be, and then straight away you sort of go off piece and don't follow that. It can be really hard to recover from. So sometimes after you've gone through sort of some one-to-ones, maybe an informal, improvement process of some kind, a formal capability procedure can be needed. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about what that procedure entails today, although I can obviously help with that. It's more about, have you followed these steps before you launch into it? So first of all, I think, like I said, reasonable investigation. And that doesn't mean, you've got to spend days and days combing through all of their work. It's just about some key dates, some key issues. It doesn't have to be months and months and months of errors. Try and keep it within about 3 months, I would say. A few critical things that haven't been done, or things that have been missed, and that's really all you need to start it. And when it refers to 2 years, now that just means ultimately, if somebody hasn't been there for 2 years, they can't bring an unfair dismissal claim. So it may be that you can fast track that process and look at termination. And sometimes, if I'm honest, that can be a lot better than dragging somebody through a process that ultimately is going to destroy their confidence. It's going to, waste a lot of time and resource for a relationship that just isn't working. So what I would say is, rather than spend months, trying to drag them through a process, if it just isn't working and it's not a good fit, then sit down and say that. And, don't be afraid of that. Just sit down and say that this really isn't working. See how they feel, because it might be a weight lifted off their shoulders as well. And a lot of the time someone will say, this really isn't. And then you can say, okay, how about we think about termination? put them on garden leave, give them some time to find another job and gather themselves again, rather than dragging them through a process just for the sake of it. And always sort of ascertain whether it's a performance or a disciplinary issue. So if somebody has missed quite a big deadline and they just ultimately have not done that work, there's no reasonable explanation for that. That is a disciplinary matter, not a performance issue, I would say. So it's always good to take some advice on that if you can. Back to the documents, like I was talking about at the start, make sure you've got all of your ducks in a row. So if they don't have a job description, you know, they don't have a person specification, there's no appraisals, there's no training records. If there isn't anything like that, it's going to be very difficult for you to take them through a capability procedure reasonably, because, you know, what have you got to refer to? You know, in some cases you wouldn't have a leg to stand on if there was absolutely no job description or no evidence to show what is actually expected of that person in that job. And it would make that very difficult. So start monitoring their work, if you haven't already. So like I said earlier, just approach that quite gently and explain. You know, you don't want to lie, but you might say a few things have been picked up. So internally, we've decided that we're going to start doing some more regular checks of work. You don't have to say, you need to send me every email before you send it, or I'm going to start looking at all your stuff. It's about just approaching that in the right way. And like I said, you don't want to lie, but I'd perhaps just say, you know, this is team-wide. We're just going to be looking at everyone's work a bit more closely. We're going to be doing some file checks and try and make it less personal, but you're still able to collect all that evidence that you need. You know, make sure you interview them. Not a formal investigation as if it was a disciplinary, if it's performance, but you still need to sit down with them and say, okay, there was X, Y, and Z. What happened? Make sure it's documented. Make sure you've got their response. Because all the time you're collecting evidence, you know, that you can go and reflect on and, you know, really think about what the issues are. And make sure you set objectives over a set time period before you go for a formal process. So sometimes, you know, clients will come to me and say, I need to start a capability process because this person can't do their job. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But have you gone through at least a month of setting objectives, meeting with them, tangible objectives, you know, things to achieve, and reviewing that before you've thought about a formal process? Because otherwise, you know, it could just end up being fundamentally unfair what you're doing, and that is going to massively affect well-being. You know, it's really important that you give them some time, because it's going to pay off in the long run, even if your priority at the moment is just to get them out or something. You know, it will pay off if you go through that informal process before. So that leads on to unfair dismissal, and these are the most common sort of reasons that we see for an unfair dismissal claim when it's related to performance. And the first one is that the allegations are just unfounded. You know, there's no evidence. There's been no formal supervision, no informal supervision, or even if there has, there's no evidence of that. The second really big one is that the poor performance is actually linked to stress. So it's just been a vicious cycle. And, you know, you've been trying to performance management, but they've also been really struggling with their mental health. And when that plays a part in it, you know, you've really got to make sure that the stress is considered, you know, within your process. So make sure that that's kind of brought in, or you at least address it during the process. Second one is failure to give prior warning. So again, this all ties in, you know, with the first point. Make sure that you've put them on notice adequately that there's issues, and it's not just sprung on them, with a reasonable timescale as well. In terms of realistic targets, I know that's quite subjective, and what's reasonable for one person might not be reasonable for another. That's why I would say, you know, take advice, get a second opinion. Don't just go rogue on it. Don't be afraid to seek support, because it can be very difficult to backpedal. So what if somebody discloses that they're suffering from stress? Can you still performance management then? So yes is the answer, but you need to strike a good balance. So you need to, you know, bring in the other issues to the performance management process and show that you're considering those things. Doesn't mean get derailed, but if somebody discloses that they're really struggling, you need to be able to prove that you've taken that into consideration when going through a process and that you've been fair. So you perhaps might want to, you know, if somebody's really sort of talking a lot about stress during a performance meeting, you might want to say, okay, well, let's keep this focused on the performance and on the job. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a separate meeting with you, a wellbeing or welfare meeting, where we just talk about, you know, how you're feeling and what we can do to help. So you're still addressing it, but you're just separating it out so you're not getting too derailed. Think about some reasonable adjustments. So it may be, you know, some more training, reallocating work, you know, altering the hours somewhat. And I know it can be quite difficult to think of reasonable adjustments sometimes, especially in roles where there are core hours. But sometimes it can just be as simple as taking a task off them and giving it to someone else in the team, you know, and saying, are you okay to look after this for a while? And obviously you've got to keep it confidential. You don't want to be telling anyone else why you're doing that, but, you know, just think about it for a few weeks, taking some tasks off them and reallocating them to somebody else. So if they state that there isn't an issue, this also happens quite a lot. So if someone's been managed, you might suspect there are performance issues. Or you might suspect that the stress is coming into that, but they might say, no, there isn't a problem, I'm absolutely fine, but they're fundamentally just not fulfilling their role. So my advice in that situation is to respect the position. Don't push them on it, but just make sure that you document, we've had this conversation, they told me there wasn't a problem, so we're going to proceed as if there isn't one. You know, you can push on it, but only to a certain extent. You don't want to harass them about it, you know. Just make sure that they know who they can contact if they want to talk, and, you know, make sure that you set a review date for another meeting. Give them some time to think in the meantime, and they might choose to share that with you at a later date. So stress at work, moving on to more of an absence theme now. There's loads of reasons why people, you know, become stressed at work, and unfortunately it often does come at quite a bad time for the business. Usually you'll find that if someone's off with stress, there are lots of other people that are highly stressed as well. It really does put a lot of pressure on the business, and I understand that. And a lot of the time you'll find that stress comes in when someone is being managed, or when commonly at the minute it's about people being asked to return to the office when they have been working at home for a long time. So on that point, what I'd say is, if you haven't got a home working policy, create one. Make sure expectations are clear, because the biggest causer of stress at the minute with regards to home working is when they've been working at home for 2 years and then suddenly they're asked to come back in and expectations weren't clear. So make sure expectations are very clear. You know, you might want to create a policy that says, you know, just to let you know, we may require you to come in. We'll try and give you, say, 24 hours, 48 hours notice. It's not going to be frequent, but from time to time, we will expect you to come in. If you have a problem with this, let your line manager know. We can have a meeting. Try and thrash things out before it gets to a point where you need them to come in, and then you've got a dispute on your hands. And this is another great question that I always get asked. Do I think it's genuine? Or it might be the other way around, and I'll have to say to the manager, do you think it's genuine, or do you think it's just a knee-jerk response? Sometimes it is tactical, but you've always got to treat it as if it is. If somebody puts a sick note in for stress at work, you know, treat it as if it's genuine, be completely sympathetic. There is nothing to lose from just being nice and showing sympathy as if you would to anybody else. And don't just accept silence. So a lot of the time, somebody will put a footnote in and it'll say stress, and then they'll think, oh, well, I can't contact them then because that'll make the stress worse. what I would say is don't accept silence. Make sure you do contact them. You know, don't harass them, but make sure you contact them and ask if they're okay, invite them to a meeting. If they choose not to engage, that's a separate problem. But don't just, you know, take the sick note and then leave them off work for weeks and weeks with no contact. And just because they're out and about, you know, they may have been seen out at the pub or something, just because they're out and about doesn't mean that they are fit for work. If someone is unfit for work, it doesn't mean they're unfit to do anything and they can't leave the house. It's unlikely to be misconduct. If they get another job, then yes, that's problematic. Or if they're, you know, constantly seen out and about and, you know, it's building up over time and you've got cause to believe that it may not be genuine, yes, that's a problem. But each case is going to turn on its own facts. So again, it's best to just take advice, you know, talk to one of us about it and we can give you a steer on what we think you should do. So check your policy. If you don't have one, I'd recommend implementing one. Make sure you've got a sickness absence policy. A lot of the time, there is no concrete sickness absence process set out anymore, like with disciplinaries or grievances. But I would always recommend a simple, you know, 3-stage process, the same as with the disciplinary. 3-stage process where they have the right to be accompanied to all the meetings. You know, there's an appeal process. There'll be an investigation beforehand. They'll be sent before the meeting, you know, what the issues are, which absences will be discussed. You know, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, but just try and make sure that you have one in place because, you know, I've had a few cases recently where we've been managing long-term absence, and without a policy, it can be really hard to do that because you invite them to a meeting and they don't understand what the meeting is. You know, they think it's a disciplinary and they're really confused about why suddenly they're invited to a formal meeting about, you know, about their absence. So sometimes it can often be best to at least have a framework written down before you approach it. In terms of stress and disability discrimination, so often we will get asked, is stress a disability, you know, for the purposes of discrimination? Now, as you'll read, it has to be a mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on their normal day-to-day. Stress can, you know, it can do that. So yes, it can be considered to be a disability. So tread carefully. And often you'll find that stress is accompanied by other things such as anxiety or depression. So if somebody has disclosed that they are, you know, suffering from extreme stress, tread carefully, especially if it goes on for a number of months, because we would be likely to advise you that, you know, it is probably going to be considered a disability. So in terms of when someone's off, you know, on a long-term sick leave because of stress, you know, do tread carefully, but ultimately just treat it like you would any other sick leave, you know, like a broken leg. It's, you know, stress, you know, if someone's off sick with stress, it is still an illness like anything else. Treat it in the same way. Don't just not contact them or, you know, leave them off. Don't feel like you have to hugely amend your usual process. Don't be afraid to enforce that and handle it properly. In terms of GP reports, so don't be afraid of them. GP and occupational health, don't be afraid of getting those reports. They're really useful and they'll benefit you a lot during a process. And often, if someone's been off for, say, 2 months already, I'll recommend that we get a GP report before we invite them to a meeting, because, you know, you want all the information you possibly can in order for you to make a decision. Consider adjustments. You know, if someone has been off for quite a while, think about whether or not you could move the meeting. Could you hold it over Teams or Zoom? Allow them to bring a companion. I would always advise that anyway, just as you would a disciplinary. And you can push forward. So like I said, manage it as you would any other absence. So with approaching the meetings, Like I said, follow your policy, think about the ACAS code, give them the right to be accompanied and so on. Think about where you're going to hold it. Always explain why you've formalised the meeting, because it may come as a shock. They may just not understand what a sickness absence process is, or why this has been started. So take some time to just explain that. Try not to make too many assumptions. Let them speak. Try and stick to the facts. Just get as much information as you can. And remember that the goal of a meeting is to agree a return to work. So that should be the focus. It shouldn't just be, why are you off? It's got to be, how can we get you back to work? Try and signpost them if you can. Find out if there's, what actually the cause of the stress is. And, is it from home? Is it something to do with the job? Is it something to do with their manager? And lastly, make sure you arrange a further meeting for certainty, because if you leave things open-ended, that's likely to create quite a lot of anxiety. So make sure you set a follow-up and you stick to it. So that gives that person certainty. They can plan for it. They know that it's happening. They know they've got a chance to follow up with you. And like I said, don't be afraid of the medical evidence. Make sure you seek proper consent. There is a certain piece of information that you need to give them, called their AMRA rights, if you're writing to their GP. And it needs to be set out in a proper letter where you obtain a signature. So make sure you do get that consent before you do it. Don't be afraid of getting it and thinking, oh, well, we can't implement those things, because you're not forced to. Try to act in accordance with them if you can, with the recommendations. But like I said, you're not forced to. It's just about acting reasonably. You've got to act in accordance with your resources, and that's different for every business. So don't be worried about having to follow every single recommendation that has been made. So what may happen if it isn't handled properly? There's quite a few claims that can arise as a result of stress being mishandled. One of them is a personal injury claim. Now, for this to be successful, the person would have to prove that the stress has been so severe they've suffered a psychiatric injury, and that injury was foreseeable by the employer. So it's quite a high test. It's not something that we see frequently, but it is a risk nonetheless if you've got quite a bad situation. Breach of contract, this is quite common. So usually you'll see somebody resign and make a constructive unfair dismissal claim and say that their employer has acted so badly that they can't possibly continue to work there because they've been so unreasonable. With regards to unfair dismissal, so we've lightly touched upon that, with regards to performance management, but in a case where their employment has been terminated due to poor performance, they may choose to bring an unfair dismissal claim, and that may be accompanied by disability discrimination if there's been stress involved, like I said before, because the stress may fall under the remit of the Equality Act. So moving on from that, how to reduce the risk. So have a review of your procedures, make sure you follow them correctly, and if you're not going to follow them verbatim, then explain why you're not and the reason for that. It's usually good to have a clause in there that says we may choose to skip stages or amend the policy as appropriate, because the policy isn't going to work for every single person. So follow it as much as you can, and at least work from it. But in situations that you can't, just explain carefully why you're not. And if you haven't undertaken a management standard risk assessment, then do one. They're really useful, and it'll help you, understand, what your key risks are relating to stress in the organisation. And it can also help you with a defence against any tribunal claims. Think about ways to monitor health and wellbeing. So if you don't do an employee engagement survey or any kind of surveys, think about doing one. They're really, really useful. Think about having a stress and mental wellbeing policy. So we've created one. It covers things like, who they should speak to, the purpose of welfare meetings, the support managers should be given, and how to handle stress-related absence and certain legal obligations. It's really useful. I think a lot of our clients have got it implemented, and it's just signposting more than anything, I'd say. So it's useful to have, and it gives employees confidence you're addressing it. And the last one is investing in an EAP program. So we have recently partnered with a company called Health Assured, and we're going to be offering, the chance to connect with them to our clients. And I'm actually amazed by how accessible this is. I thought that the cost of these was going to be astronomical, but they're really, really not. And we've got a guest speaker, Adam. So I'll see if I can just transfer to Adam now. Just bear with me a minute. Okay, Adam, are you there? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe. So, afternoon, everyone. My name's Adam Dabshire. I'm the intermediary development here at Team Lead. Phoebe very kindly invited me along just to bring to life the Health Assured proposition, basically. So I have got a couple of slides to share with you. So I suppose, why Health Assured in the first instance? So we are the UK and Ireland's largest independent award-winning EAP provider. At last count, we support over 15 million lives across all sectors throughout the UK and Ireland. And that's made up of 75,000 different organisations. So that ranges from your local corner shop that's got 3 or 4 members of staff, let's say, all the way up to one of our largest clients, which has 90,000 staff across the world. So we can actually provide an international EAP as well. So if you know any clients that have a UK base as well as overseas offices, we can support there as well, with all calls answered in local language, face-to-face, and delivered in local language as well for our international provision. All calls are answered 24/7, 365 days a year. Now, the key thing to remember here is we don't use answer phones. We don't bounce calls outside of office hours. So if one of your clients wanted to ring through 3:30 Christmas Day morning, they would get through to one of our counsellors here on site in Manchester or in our sister office over in Hinckley. For our face-to-face counselling network, we've got 1,650 counsellors and psychologists on our network throughout the UK and Ireland, which enables us to tap into those quicker than anybody else in the market, essentially. Typically, the first session of counselling is delivered inside 3 days of us taking that first call. We've got Wellbeing app as well, with live chat functionality, video calling, pre-recorded webinars. We're also really proud to be the first EAP providers to join the Stonewall Diversity Programme as well. Now, I'm sure you're all aware who Stonewall are, but they're the leading charity for the LGBTQ community within the UK. So that means that all the policies and procedures that we have in place, the way that we treat members of that community from our own organisation, as well as the clients that we service, are as they should be, as equals and as everybody else, as everyone else. We've got an extremely great client retention rate of 94%, with most of our clients staying with us on average for between 3 to 7 years in terms of tenure. And as you can see there, one of the key statistics is 25% of our calls actually occur outside of your standard operating hours. And by that standard operating hours, I mean general office hours. We never close, but just to put that into perspective, really. So essentially, what do we offer? So it's unlimited 24/7 access to a confidential free phone helpline, 24/7 crisis assistance telephone support, up to 6 sessions of face-to-face, video, online or telephone-based counselling per employee, per issue, per year. So the key thing that I always like to call out there, it's per issue. So if an individual has 10 separate issues throughout that year, they can access up to 60 sessions of counselling, essentially, via their employee assistance programme. Something else as well that we do, we offer the service to spouse, partners and dependents between the ages of 16 and 24 as well. Now, they can access any telephonic element of the service, including the structured telephone-based therapy. The only thing that they can't access is the face-to-face counselling, and that's just to fall in line with HMRC guidelines, because as it stands, employee assistance programmes are not a taxable benefit. We offer free legal information, so we have a team of in-house legal professionals, all with a law degree, that can advise on such topics as divorce, wills and probate. Unfortunately, given the situation, we've seen a huge increase in that. Immigration, neighbour disputes, tenancy disputes, consumer law. The only thing that we don't advise on, for obvious reasons, is employment law. Now, in those scenarios, what we would advise is we'd signpost the individual to the relevant organisation. So whether that be ACAS or Citizens Advice Bureau. So we wouldn't leave the caller without an option. We just wouldn't provide that in the moments of support because it's a huge conflict of interest for us. We offer debt and financial information as well. And we've also got a partnership with Step Change, who are the leading debt charity in the UK as well. So if it's something that comes apparent in that call that's more stringent that's needed in terms of taking hold of people's finances, again, with that service user's consent, we can transfer them through to Step Change, who can take hold of that part for them whilst they're getting the emotional support in the background. We offer a family advice line as well on such topics as childcare, elder care. We've got access, as I mentioned earlier on, to our Wellbeing portal and mobile phone application. Traditional way of referral really is the self-referral route from the individual themselves. However, with their consent, we can accept a referral from HR, manager, physiotherapist, trade union, or occupational health individual. So if that individual isn't confident enough to make that first step, with their consent, you can reach out and make a referral to us on their behalf. We offer management consultancy service, and as I mentioned, we offer coverage for dependents and retirees as well. Retirees for up to 3 months after they leave the organisation that they currently work for. So what are the benefits of an EAP? So we've seen, this is our data by the clients that we've taken on board. We've seen a 45% reduction in mental health related sickness and absence. So EAPs are designed to be proactive rather than reactive measures. So we've seen a 45% reduction in mental health, 18% improvement in staff turnover, because not only are individuals looking for the money that's on offer now when they're looking for a job role, they're looking what benefits are included as well. 8% boost in staff productivity, and probably the key one as well, a 30% drop in costs and expenses. So in relation to sick pay, presenteeism, one-off assessments, if clients were paying for private counselling for these individuals as well, which can work out quite expensive. We've seen a 30% reduction in our costings there as well. And finally, if you do have any questions or queries, you can contact myself or Phoebe just to ask any general questions or queries, just on the details that are on screen there. You'll be pleased to know that's it for my slides. I know you've got quite a lot to go through, but I just wondered if anybody had any questions while I've got you.
Sure. I've got a question on those stats you pulled on 30% reduction in cost. Is that, how did you calculate that?
So that was pulled by our management information team in terms of the individuals that were out of work when they first joined the therapy, as opposed to back in work when the therapy had ended. So we send out a survey map at the beginning of therapy and at the end, which checks on if they're out of work and in work. And we also hold sessions with our clients as well, just to see the impact that their own sickness has had on them. And that's where we've pulled that from, Matt. So it's accumulative really across our book of business.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no more questions, then but I'm sure people can always contact me or you, Adam. But thank you for that. That was great.
No problem.
I'm glad to have been able to share that with everybody. So I'm now going to introduce you to Sarah. Sarah, if you'd like to just unmute yourself. And Sarah is going to talk to you all about building a culture of resilience and managing stress, both personally and as a manager. So I'll leave you to it, Sarah.
Thank you, Phoebe, for having me here. I'm very excited to talk to you a bit about stress resilience and oh, sorry,
that's me.
How was it? And so yeah, I want to talk to you today about building stress resilience, why that's a useful thing to do for business and also for yourself as an individual. So I'll be talking to you for about 30 minutes about stress resilience. So here we go. So why is building stress resilience so important for both individuals and for businesses? So I'm a stress resilience coach and trainer, so I help people to build resilience to stress. But the reason for that is because obviously life and work and stress is all around us. Life can be stressful, work can be stressful, and we're never going to kind of eliminate that. But what we can do is build our resilience to that, so we can become more resilient to the stresses and strains that are put on us in the workplace or out in the world, to help us to move through that. So obviously from the point of view of an individual, that is beneficial, but also from a business perspective, if we can build the resilience within our teams, then we can kind of give them the tools to minimize the impact that stress can have upon them. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in a moment. So when we talk about stress, it's kind of our body's natural response to something that we're perceiving as a threat. So if that's a short-term thing, that can actually be quite beneficial. So we don't want to completely demonize stress when we talk about it. So, you know, for example, doing this presentation today, having a little bit of nerves prior to a presentation is good, because it helps you get in the right frame of mind. It helps you to perform at your peak, and it helps you to deliver more than you would if you were not having those sort of, you know, minor stress responses. So that's fine, and stress can be really useful in that sort of situation. However, if you have sort of longer term stress, then that's actually not very good for you. So it's sort of a stress response is like your body's innate reaction to a fear or something that's perceived as a threat, but it's not intended to be long term. So it's good for helping us run away from a lion, for example, but we're not intended to be in that stress state for long periods of time. So when we do end up in that stress state for long periods of time, that's when it can start to cause us a problem. So it's not that all stress is bad. Some stress in short-term bursts can actually be really useful, but long-term stress can have a really negative impact on individuals. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how stress can affect people, so that we can get a bit more of an understanding of you know, the types of things that can be affected, and then we'll move on to looking at how that can impact the business overall. So there's lots of different elements, it's different for everyone. Obviously, people are all different, everyone's unique, and the way that they experience stress and the types of things that would cause them to feel stressed are going to be different. So it's not a, you know, one size fits all solution with this kind of thing, because we're working with people and people are all different. But some of the types of things that can be affected are physical health. So it can actually, long-term stress can have a really negative impact on your overall physical health, and obviously also on your mental health. So both of those elements can really drastically be affected by long-term stress or intense periods of stress. And I'll come on to a live example of that a bit later on. But there's more to it than that. It can affect more than your physical and your mental health. It can affect the way you feel about yourself, so your level of confidence. So if someone's sort of suffering from stress, or they're feeling overwhelmed, I mean, a lot of stress that comes from the workplace, like Phoebe said, is from you know, overwhelm, too much work to do, or feeling like they're not performing at the level. You know, they might be aware that they're not performing at that level that they want to, but that it's sort of a vicious circle, and so it can affect your confidence, it can affect your self-esteem, it can also affect your mood. So you might notice that someone who is feeling under pressure and who is quite stressed out might be less tolerant, or have a, you know, like a shorter fuse, be less able to deal with things that they might not ordinarily be able to deal with. So they might be more moody, more easily angered, or more emotional, easily upset. So stress can cause that. Another thing that can be impacted for individuals who are feeling under pressure or under stress is motivation. So often your actual levels of motivation can massively drop, so you feel less like you want to work hard, or you want to do things because you feel like you can't do it. Your motivation can be massively affected. Feelings of self-worth, so people can start to doubt themselves, feel that they're not valuable and capable of doing the job. It can also affect your ability to think clearly. So again, this is a big issue in the workplace, and we'll come on to that in a bit. But if you are under a lot of pressure, if you're feeling overwhelmed, swamped, there's lots of things going on causing stress in your life, then it can really impact your ability to clearly think about what it is that you're doing, or anything other than the stressor itself. So it can be really distracting for people. It can affect people's ability to make decisions, because, you know, these things are all interlinked. Self-esteem, confidence, clear thinking, your mood, your mindset can really impact the types of decisions that you're making. Stress can also affect someone's ability to grow and learn. So if you're in a stressed state of mind and you're not able to think clearly and you're not feeling motivated, then you're less likely to want to take on new training or your personal development or your personal growth. So, you know, it's a long-term effect that way as well. Creative thinking is another thing that's massively affected by stress. So again, because when the mind is stressed and distracted, it's very difficult to have those sort of creative thinking patterns to help you to problem solve, for example. So it's all kind of interlinked, but it's big impact across lots of areas for an individual. And also the level of enjoyment and fulfillment that someone finds in their life can be massively affected by feeling overwhelmed and stressed. So there's lots to it. It's not just a simple, one-stop shop. Different people are affected differently by stress, and it's to different degrees depending on what it is that they're going through. And it's not a linear thing either. It's, stress can be high and then reduce, and at different times in your life. So it's a difficult thing to manage. So with all that going on with a stressed individual, how does that then translate to what you might see in business then? So if you have employees or a team, or even if it's just yourself but you're running a business, then stress can have a massive impact on how you show up in the business and actually the quality of the work that you produce. So here are some of the things that stress, so someone who is feeling stressed might exhibit in the workplace. So all of those things that we've discussed already have an impact in the workplace. So things like presenteeism, so that's turning up to work but not actually kind of engaging with it, because it could be that they're not thinking clearly, or they're not able, they're distracted thinking about the stressful item, or they're feeling so overwhelmed they don't know where to start. Absenteeism, obviously not turning in at all. And again, sort of motivation can link into that. They're all sort of interlinked and intertwined. So maybe they don't feel like they can come to work, or when they do come to work, they don't feel like they can perform at the usual level because their motivation's damaged by the stress. So there's lots of things going on there, which links into obviously reduced productivity. If someone's not able to perform at the level that they normally do because they're distracted, they can't think clearly, they're not able to make good decisions, then that's going to impact their productivity, which could then result in missed deadlines as well. So it's kind of a sort of snowball effect. Once someone gets into that space, it can be quite difficult to unpick exactly what's happening. So you might see that there's a lot of these things going on, and you might start to recognize these behaviors, and they could be to do with stress, not necessarily just because the person's switched off and isn't interested. It could be that they're dealing with a stressful situation. Another thing that is affected is people's ability to turn up on time, so lateness, whether that be running late for meetings. So that could be if someone's really overwhelmed and swamped by a workload and they're racing from one meeting to the next, or they're trying to do one piece of work to hit one deadline that they've missed, and then they're playing catch up, so they turn up late. Or it could be on a morning and their motivation is rock bottom and their confidence and self-esteem is rock bottom, and they turn up late, and actually when they turn up late they feel like that's achievement in itself because they were tempted not to turn up at all. So these are the types of things that could be going on. Obviously, all of this is going to affect the quality of someone's work. If you compare that with someone who feels confident, empowered, in control, they've got a good balance to the workload, and they're motivated, they're excited to be at work, you're going to get a much better quality output from someone who's in that space than someone who is in the stress state of mind. You're likely to get an increase in behavioural issues. Again, this links back to what I said about sort of it affecting mood. And this links as well to increased team conflict. So you might find that if someone's stressed out, they're going to be much less tolerant of other people that they're working with. You might find that there's more friction between members of the team. People might be less patient with each other. So it sort of escalates then, because if you then have a negative interaction and some conflict, that can add to the stress. So it can really be like a snowball effect. Customer service can be affected by this as well, because obviously if your team member is stressed out, overwhelmed, the quality of the work is suffering, they're missing deadlines, that's going to impact on your customer service and the product that you're delivering to your customer as well. So there's so many elements to this that you really need to be aware of. It's like a jigsaw piece of all the elements that are affected. And ultimately that can lead to loss of profit, increased staff turnover, because if you're not dealing with these issues and you're not able to give people the tools to help them to deal with this, it is going to just escalate and people could end up leaving. And also you could end up with a lack of growth and innovation within a business, because your team are not able to be performing at their best. They're not able to do that creative thinking and that growth for themselves. So there's a lot of impact that stress can have in a business. And on the individual themselves. So it's really important that we kind of get a good handle on this and what we can do about it in order to minimise the likely impact of stress on your team, on yourself, and on your business. So there's a few myths that I just wanted to share with you, because these are sorts of things that I've heard in the past, and I just wanted to sort of talk through a couple of them. To do with stress. So the first one is the team are not stressed. If the team are not stressed, they're not working hard enough. So you don't have to be in a state of long-term stress in order to be massively effective and productive. So if someone is being effective and productive, they don't necessarily have to be stressed. So just because a team is stressed out doesn't mean that you're getting the most out of them. In fact, the opposite is probably the case. If you've got a team who are highly motivated, empowered, listened to, and you've got a good, strong, positive culture, then they're going to be much more productive than a stressed out team who are just not coping. People who are affected by stress are weak and not good enough for their role. This is another thing that's just not true. Stress can affect anybody, and it doesn't mean that you are not good at your role. It can literally affect anybody at any time, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. People use the mental health card just to skive off work. Now, I've heard that more times than I would like to admit. Now, it's important to appreciate that the mental health situation that we're in at the minute is significant. So if you end up having more than one person who is saying that they're stressed in your workplace, that doesn't mean that they're making it up. It could be that you've got several people in that situation. So to assume that because you've had more than one, that they're just all copying each other and using it as a way to try and do less is just not the case. And the statistics from Mind were saying that 1 in 4 people will have a mental health issue within every year, and 1 in 6 people have reported some sort of mental health issue, could be stress, within every week. So that those stats are high. That means within a workplace you're going to have people who are suffering with stress. It's more than likely. So that, like Phoebe said, when someone presents with stress as an issue, take them seriously. They're unless it's proved otherwise, take them seriously and assume that actually is the case and deal with it that way. People who are committed to a business and are results driven would never let stress get in their way. So often the opposite is true. Often the people who are the most committed to your business and who go the extra mile and who stay the longer hours and work from home in the evening and do what it takes to get the job done for you and your business are the ones who are going to be the most stressed out. And it can happen to anybody, and that everybody's got their limits, and there's no kind of correlation really between the level of commitment and the limit that people have. So don't assume that people are not taking your role seriously and are not committed to the business just because they're feeling stressed at that time. And I think the next one links into that really as well. Then we've got wellbeing strategies are nice to have in business, not an essential. That's just not the case, and I think nowadays that's more evident than ever. But actually, it's a requirement from HSE as well. Like Phoebe mentioned earlier, you know, you do need to have a wellbeing risk assessment and take action on that, because it's not an optional. It's something that you need to have within the business. And another interesting one, only people in senior positions will ever be stressed out, and that's not true either. I think anybody within any organisation can suffer from stress from work, and it doesn't have to be that they're making massive decisions and looking after enormous budgets and going to really stressful, high-profile meetings. Anybody within your business can feel stress from the work that they're doing if they, for example, feel that there's more work to do than the time that they've got to do it in. That can be stressful. You know, even if they're doing relatively what seem like simple tasks, that can still be stressful for people. So don't assume that it's isolated to people in senior positions. It could be anybody within a business who could suffer from that. Even if you think, well, it's a really simple job, how could you find that stressful? People can. So don't assume it's just exclusive for people in senior positions. I don't know why I put this slide in, because it's got a great big picture of my head, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my story and why I do what I do, why I'm so passionate about building resilience to stress for people and within businesses, and how I know that it's not just people who are skiving off that can suffer from stress. So obviously, as you're aware, I'm Sarah Elizabeth, and I now run stress resilience workshops, and I'm a stress resilience coach. But the reason that I do that is because going back several years, I suppose I was one of those career climber, high flyer types. So I was very driven to be the best that I could be in the workplace. I had various senior positions. I had quite intense, quite stressful job, and so I did a lot of things like project management, and I worked with all different sort of areas within a large business, and looked after a lot of team, did a lot of leadership development and all that sort of stuff. I'm also a mother of two, and was the main breadwinner at the time, and I had an hour's commute, and all sorts of things were going on in my life. And to cut a long story short, I wasn't aware of how to be resilient to stress, and I wasn't aware that there were any techniques that you could have that would help you be more able to deliver what the demands are that life places on you. And so I basically ran myself into the ground, and I suffered from a massive burnout. So that involved me ignoring all the signs that stress was creeping up, ignoring all the signs that I was becoming overwhelmed. And ultimately, my body decided that I'd had enough stress, and that was as much as it was going to tolerate. So everybody, even if you are the most committed, dedicated, most driven person within a business, at some point you have a limit at which your body will say that is enough, and you can't carry on anymore in a lifestyle like that. So my body sort of decided for me that I was not going to be doing that anymore. And so in the middle of an office, I had a bit of a sort of, I call it an episode, a bit like a sort of like a panic attack, but it wasn't triggered by anything in particular at that time. It's nothing significant had happened in that moment. It was just an accumulation of long-term stress. And I ended up then unable to do anything. I couldn't drive home that night, and then I was literally couldn't get out of bed for 3 weeks. I couldn't drive, I couldn't look after the children, I couldn't go to work, and it was an absolute nightmare. And I decided at that point that I was never ever going to let that happen to me again. So I made it my mission to find out how to protect myself, so to prevent ever getting in that overwhelmed situation again. Now, at the time when it happened to me, I thought I was the only one. I thought that I was a massive failure and not good enough, and it massively impacted my confidence and self-esteem. And I thought that it was something that was exclusive to me, and I was just a great big disaster. But the more research I did and the more I learned about it, I realized that actually this kind of thing happens a lot to a lot of people, and people are on different levels, on different scales of this quite a lot of the time. So this is not exclusive to me. This is something that is really, really, widespread, and it's something that we can do something about, which is why I'm so now passionate about doing that. So I sort of share tools and techniques to help people prevent getting into that place, because it's not a very nice place to be, let me tell you. But it is a place that you can come back from, and it's a place that you can come back powerfully from. I mean, at the time when it happened to me, it was one of those things that you just don't talk about. And so at the time, I never mentioned anything about it, and I kept it very quiet. But now I talk about it because I want people to understand that if they're going through something like that, they're not alone. And it does happen to other people, but there are things you can do about it, and there's ways that you can protect yourself and prevent that from happening. And also, if it isn't happening to you, but it might be happening to someone in your team, it doesn't mean that they're not committed, they're not dedicated, they're not skilled. You've still got that same skilled person. They just need a little bit of support for a while to get them back to where they need to be. So it's a sort of a message about, don't just dismiss someone because they're stressed, therefore they're, going to be unable to perform forever. It's a short-term thing in the most cases, and if we can give the right support, then people can come back from it. So I've not had an incident like that ever since, and we're going back a lot of years now. So I know that you can come back from it and be stronger for it. So that's a little bit of context about me and why I'm so passionate about what I do and why I talk about it so much, because I think that's part of the thing, is to raise awareness about it. So how do you spot signs of stress in your team? Well, this was quite an easy slide to write, because basically I just copied and pasted the one where it tells you how stress can appear within a business. So all of the things that we talked about, if someone is exhibiting these kind of behaviors, then it could be that it's stress that's causing it. And the other thing is, it's all very good looking at stress within your team and within the business, but what about within yourself? So a lot of what I do is asking people to self-reflect and look at how they're feeling and how stress is impacting them in any one time. So how do you spot signs of stress in yourself? Because that is one of the things where I went majorly wrong all those years back before I knew what I was doing. Was I ignored all of these signs, and I didn't listen to them until my body decided that enough was enough and I couldn't ignore them any longer. So if you kind of imagine a time when you yourself were under an immense amount of pressure, you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, stressed out, just have a think about how that feels. So where do you hold that in your body? Because everybody's different, so everybody experiences stress and tension in a different way. But where you hold that in your body, if you can learn where that is, you can learn to deal with that. Also think about the types of thoughts that you have. Are you feeling positive and complimentary about yourself, or do you start to doubt yourself, and does it start to impact on your confidence? If you think about a time when you're really stressed and overwhelmed, how able are you to concentrate on anything other than that thing that's stressing you out? If you think about how you feel overall, do you feel positive, motivated, calm, empowered, enthusiastic, or are you kind of quite overwhelmed and fearful? There's quite a lot of fear energy associated with stress, or you might be feeling upset, frustrated, angry. So you can kind of learn to recognize those things, so that you can get to learn the warning signs yourself before it escalates into something bigger. Think about, if you're in a stressed situation, how your interactions with others are affected. So are you as patient with other people? If people are coming to you at work and asking you questions or asking for support, if you're feeling stressed out, are you as patient as you could be or would be if you weren't in that stressed state of mind? creative thinking. This is a massive thing that's affected by stress and ability to solve problems. So again, if you're in that stressed mindset, you are likely to be less creative and less able to come up with good solutions and problem solving. It can also affect how confident you feel in your own abilities and also your energy level. So whether you're feeling energized and empowered or whether you're feeling demotivated and exhausted. So again, these are things that you can learn about yourself, and it's not like all of this isn't like a one size fits all situation, because everybody's different, and that's why you need to be able to learn tools that you can share with your teams that can be tailored to the individual. We need to learn to self-reflect a little bit. So what's the solution then? So we know that stress is not very good. It's not very good for the individual, but it's also not very good for the business either. And it's really going to potentially impact on your productivity and how you're servicing the customer and how well your team are interacting and gelling. So what is the solution, and how do we build more resilience within a team? So as I've just said, there isn't really a one size fits all solution to this. You need to be able to be agile and to develop it and tailor it to your team, your own individual needs and your business. But there are several elements to it that need to be considered. And these are just some of them. It's not an exhaustive list, but one of the big things, if we're talking about a big business situation, is business culture. So there's a lot of influence that business culture can have on how stressed or otherwise people feel in the workplace. And there's a lot of things that you can do to improve the culture within a business in order to make it more open, more nurturing, and for people to be able to have these kind of discussions without it being a taboo topic that people shouldn't be talking about. So by creating that open and supportive culture, you can actually really help to build resilience. A big thing is to get buy-in and understanding from the senior team. So business culture generally comes from the most senior team and cascades down, because those people, whether they realize it or not, have the biggest influence on the culture and also just the general vibe of a business. So even if the most senior members of a team are not present and people don't necessarily see them and know that they're there, simply by that being the case, they're still having an impact on the team because they're creating that distance and that disconnect. So it's really important that the senior team understand their impact and their part in all of this, and also for them to understand what they can do in order to promote a culture of well-being within a business. Setting healthy boundaries, that's so simple and so powerful. You know, there's so many things that can be put in place in terms of business culture and structure and how the business operates that helps to promote well-being and minimize stress within a business. Simple things like having meetings that last 55 minutes instead of an hour, to give people 5 minutes at the end of a meeting to nip to the loo and write some notes or whatever they want to do, rather than having meeting marathons where back to back meetings and you're expecting people to concentrate for that amount of time and then do something productive with that information. So really simple stuff like that can make a massive impact on people and the level to which they feel overwhelmed. Obviously, you need appropriate processes and procedures in place. So Phoebe's touched on a lot of that stuff already, but you need to have the structure in place to make all this possible. So if someone is feeling overwhelmed or stressed or what have you, to have a system that helps deal with that and a process so they can go and speak to someone in particular who can support them through that. Because again, like Phoebe was saying before, people don't necessarily always want to open up to their line manager. Sometimes it's difficult to say to your boss that you're struggling or that you're not finding it easy to get on with things. You want to tell your boss that you're doing well and absolutely fine, I'm coping absolutely fine, everything's great, because hardly anybody wants to say anything other to their boss. But if there's someone else that they can talk to where it's confidential and they can say, actually, I'm not feeling very confident at the minute, or I'm worried about this, or my workload's so big and I don't know how to prioritize it, or I don't know how to manage my time because I never seem to be able to hit deadlines. You know, have a system in place that that there is someone who people can go to and talk to about that kind of thing. Effective soft skills. So this is a biggie really, because you're dealing with people, and you know, you need to be able to be reactive and responsive to each of the individual's needs. So having effective listening skills, having a bit of empathy, and ability to create trust and open communication can really help people to sort of open up and say, actually, I feel like my workload is a bit too much at the minute. Can we have a discussion about how you would like me to prioritize that so I'm delivering the best for the business straight away? You know, but and for people to feel that they can have that conversation. So it's important for leaders to have those soft skills, as well as the processes and the procedures. And then giving your team and yourself the skills to have personal resilience, so that when they are feeling overwhelmed, they quickly know how to recognize it, and then they know what to do about it as well. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm not going to spiral down into the rabbit hole about it. I'm going to recognize it quickly, and then I'm going to do something about it so that it's not going to start affecting my work. So there are things that you can learn, and practical skills that you can use to actually be more resilient to work-related stress issues. And those are the types of tools that I train, because those are the ones that are most helpful. Supportive, empowering, coaching environment. Again, so it's just creating that situation where people feel that they can reach support within the team, or within their line manager, or within the business. There's someone that they can go to and say, actually, I'm feeling a bit stressed at the minute. Can I just have a minute? Can we talk it through? So by having that, you can nip so much of this stuff in the bud before it escalates into something massive, before you end up having to do, behavior management processes and all that sort of stuff. If we can create a culture in which you can have that support, then a lot of this stuff will be reduced and eliminated without you having to have the big conversations to deal with it. So knowing when to get help. So you've got kind of two options really, depending on where you are within a business and how the what the culture is like, whether you've got a good empowering culture already, or whether the culture is quite toxic and there's a lot of conflict and infighting, and there's a lot of stress and animosity and frustration. Based on where you are with the culture at the moment in the place that you work, will probably dictate how much help you're going to need. Because if you're in a really good place already, it might be just that you carry on as you are, keep it in-house, do a bit of fine-tuning, make sure you're doing all the things that you can do and carry on. If you're in a place where the culture just isn't where it could be, and it's starting to impact the stress levels of good employees who have been good previously, who've been hitting deadlines previously, performing previously, but something's happened and they're changing, then it might be that you would want to look at getting third-party support. And the other benefit of that is, as we've said already, people don't always want to open up to their line manager or their colleagues about things. So a lot of the time, for example, if I go into businesses, people will open up and talk to me because they know it's confidential, about things that they would never want to say to their boss. But it's good to get it off their chest and then create a support process around that, without them having, giving them the ability to save face in front of their boss and also deal with the issue. So in terms of the types of services that I offer, so I do all sorts of different types of training. So generally I'll go into businesses and do like workshops with the senior team to get them to appreciate some of this stuff and to learn the resilience skills that they can then disseminate to the rest of their team. And that usually is accompanied with one-to-one coaching, because a lot of the time there's benefit to the group work, but then also the one-to-one individual work is really powerful as well. So people can focus on the bits that are specific to them. So I do live in-person workshops tailored to the specific needs of a business, because again, every business is different and the teams and individuals within a business are different as well. So it's about being able to tailor things specifically to your needs, your culture, and where you want to get to with your business. I also have an online 6-week training program, which is called the Leadership Self-Mastery Program. So that helps take leaders on a journey from stressed out and overwhelmed as individuals, and takes them through all of the stress resilience tools and techniques over a period of 6 weeks, because behaviour change doesn't happen in half a day. It takes time for these things to bed in and to be implemented. So there's a 6-week online training program with a video Monday to Friday each week, taking them through different types of resilience and also the understanding about how to recognize stress in your team, how to share that with your team, how to support your team. So it kind of takes you on a journey as an individual, and then also as a team member as well. And each day there's self-reflection questions, so it's very much tailored to the individual and how here's someone. It's very much tailored to the individual. You know, even though it's an online program, it's specific to you because it's self-reflection about you, and it's all about learning about you, the way you deal with stress and how you can become more resilient. And then I also do lots of nice things like wellbeing treats and retreats and live training events and workshops in the community. So that's what I've been doing this morning. So there's all sorts of ways of tackling this to build resilience. I'm also a CPD accredited coach and a member of the International Coaching Federation. So, oh, I'm pressing the wrong button. So if anyone's interested in talking more about what I've waffled on at you for a bit too long about, I'm sorry about that, or you know, just wants to have a chat. I love talking about well-being and stress resilience, and so if anyone's interested in that and wants to have a chat or whatever, you can. I was very high tech and I put a QR code on here, so you can scan that and that'll take you to my LinkedIn profile if you want to connect on there, or you can email me at sarah@seassociates.com if you want to talk about anything that I've discussed, or if you have any questions or anything. So I hope that I'll meet some of you soon, and I'd love to talk to you. And so yeah, that is me and a little bit about stress resilience. So thank you, Phoebe and Blythe, for having me. And
thank you so much, Sarah. That was brilliant.
No worries. Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing that for ages. But yeah, if anyone wants to talk to Sarah, we'll send the slides out after, so you can grab her email from there, or if anyone wants to get that, just drop us an email and we can pass her contact details on.
Thank you. Shall I skip across to
Sarah?
I'll let you do it, Phoebe. Thank you.
So lastly, my lovely colleague Blythe is just going to give us a few tips about wellbeing during the recruitment process. So not that long ago, we set up Bhayani Recruitment, and Blythe's been with us for about 4 months now. So you might have seen her face a lot, so I'll shut up and let her crack on with her bit.
Yes, so hello, hi everyone, thank you, Phoebe. So yeah, so I'm Blythe, I'm a recruitment advisor at Bhayani Recruitment. So just a little bit about the business if you don't know much about us already, just because we are still fairly new, aren't we? I believe it's nearly been a year, so yeah, not even been open a year yet, but we are doing well, I'd like to think. But for those who don't already know, Bhayani Recruitment was originally set up to assist our original clients in our sister company, Bhayani HR and Employment Law, with any of their recruitment needs. So we have brought the same relationships that our clients and team have in our sister company across the recruitment side, because we know that this is something that we're good at. We do like to pride ourselves in the relationships that we have with our clients, and I think it's something that really should have emphasis on anyway, because relationships, you can go back, especially in recruitment, whether it's clients, whether it's candidates, you can always go back to people and go back to your network and you will find someone somewhere. So we do believe in the importance of having strong relationships, as I've mentioned, with both candidates and clients. And in all honesty, it does help with having your own little network at the moment, because as I'm sure we are all aware, the current recruitment market at the moment, it is a little bit horrible. It is a bit barren, and the ball at the moment is definitely in the candidate's court. It used to be completely the other way around, and obviously the employer would have the pick of the bunch with candidates, but it's now completely different. There are so many jobs out there now compared to the amount of candidates that are out there. So it's really, really hard to find top-notch candidates at the moment, because obviously there's a lot of hopping around in jobs that I'm sure we're all aware of as well. So having strong relationships and priding yourself on that is definitely something that will be noticed by candidates. So moving on to a little bit more about our business. Obviously, these are the areas that we do tend to specialise in, obviously legal and HR with our sister company as well. But in all honesty, we don't really say no to many vacancies at the moment, just because we're just trying to be adaptive and see what suits us. So if you do have any questions regarding any vacancies that you may have, or just need any recruitment advice, then you know where I am, and you'll have my email at the end of this presentation. So yeah, just a little bit more then. So really similar to our sister company, 10% of our profits go to charity, and that is something that we are really proud of in both businesses. So going on to a bit more of the information then that I'm going to discuss today. So I'm going to discuss a range of external and internal factors to take into consideration when it comes to recruiting, either internally in your own business if you have a recruitment team yourselves, maybe just a little bit of information that may help, or if you decide that you are wanting to get some sort of outsourced recruitment like ourselves, then this is what we tend to advise our clients on. This is what we tend to use for both thinking of what's going on in the current market and what can we do to help improve. And I know that you've all been sat here for quite a while this afternoon. I just want to say thank you for that. So I'm going to keep it quite short. So this slide is pretty self-explanatory. So do have a quick look at it and just familiarise yourself with it. So this is a theory that takes me back to university. I learned this at university, and I think I did this in pretty much every module. I did a HR degree, so it's quite helpful for the business that we work in. But Pestel analysis is a great way to have a look at any external factors that you want to take into consideration to see what the current market is like. And I think it's a really good tool to use if you're thinking of recruiting. So obviously, I'm not going to go through everything. I'll pick out some really important ones. So obviously, it stands for political, economical, social, technological, environmental, and legal. These are all external factors that you can have a think about to just analyse what you're going to do next in your recruitment process. So obviously, government policies that are currently being implemented, you want to get yourself in common with these and have a good understanding of what's being implemented, especially things such as the Good Work Plan that I'm sure you're familiar with, benefits in the country, what benefits are currently on, what can candidates have help with if they are struggling, and also take into consideration really current things such as strikes. So obviously I'm sure we're all familiar with the strikes that are going on at the moment. Having an understanding of potentially how candidates are going to feel maybe going into a different job. They may not feel very comfortable or confident to leave the job that they're in at the moment, knowing that the situation is happening like this, such as strikes. So just having a bit of knowledge, and maybe just something where if you have a really good candidate who you think might be interested in a role in your business and they're maybe not wanting to move because of this reason, having an understanding of what's happening political wise at the moment is really good, just to give them a bit of advice on and a bit of reassurance, because it is stressful. It is very stressful at the moment with many factors that are going on, especially one is economical. So finance, we all know at the moment we are in a financial crisis. It's a nightmare, but one thing that you need to know moving forward is your costing and your budgets, because recruitment is an expensive process. Onboarding is expensive. You need to know your budgeting for this. And because of the ball being in the candidate's court, as I've mentioned before, and because of the financial crisis that we're in, wages need to be high, and you need to be prepared to pay that, because obviously if a candidate has a counter offer from their current employer, or they may be offered another 3 job opportunities elsewhere that are paying higher than yours, that is going to be taken into consideration. So just prepare yourself for that, obviously. A really big thing, obviously, that I know Sarah has brushed on as well in this presentation is culture. Culture is a huge thing to take into consideration as a business. So for the social side of the factors, think how is your culture? What can you do to maybe improve? What's something that you're really proud of that you want to get across to candidates when you are recruiting? What's something that makes you stand out? And just have a think of that. So environmental is a really good one as well, because obviously with climate change and all these other factors that we're taking into consideration, it may be that the candidate is maybe wanting to commute and isn't wanting to drive. Think, have you got any bike policies that you might want to implement, any travel expenses that you might be able to help with, things like that. They all tie in together, these factors. So just having a bit of common knowledge about what's going on is really important, and especially one that I'm sure you'll probably be familiar with, and if not, I can't emphasize enough, just having a look and just familiarising yourself with the legislation if you are wanting to recruit is the Equality Act, because obviously there's 9 protected characteristics and you can be liable for a discrimination claim from an employee from the day that they start. They don't need 2 years service like a dismissal claim to bring that. So just make sure that you are not discriminating in any way against any candidates, because it can also happen in recruitment and it can also happen with your staff. So just familiarise yourself with the policy if you haven't already. Okay, so moving on then. So this is more the internal factors that you can take into consideration now within your business. So the importance of candidate focused recruitment is really, really high at the moment, and there's a lot of emphasis on it because, as I've mentioned so many times, the ball is in the candidate's court and you need to be making it an enjoyable experience for them to make you stand out. Obviously, we are outsourced recruitment, so we are 50-50. We have a client-focused recruitment, obviously for our clients, but we also know the importance of candidate-focused recruitment. And the goal of candidate-focused recruitment is obviously to ensure that the candidate has a great experience with your business, regardless of the outcome. So regardless whether they get that job offer that they are applying for, you need to stand out, because either way, that candidate pool, you may go back to that candidate in a couple of weeks if a position becomes available, or say in a couple of months. If that candidate remembers you and enjoyed the experience, then you know that you've got a solid, good top tier candidate to go back to, and hopefully you might even be able to take them from a different position. You just don't know. So having that candidate pool to revert back to is really important. So why is it important? What are the benefits of candidate-focused recruitment? So it builds that brand image in the market. If you get a really good reputation for your business and for the staff that work there, if they are truly happy, if your employees are happy, then it will get round. Word of mouth works very, very, very fast, and people will want to come and work for you, especially if you are struggling to recruit. There's many, many ways that can make you stand out. So candidates' well-being is prioritised, and employers can work to reduce stress during this process. There's many ways, and I'll talk about that in a moment, of how you can reduce the stress for candidates and obviously safeguard their well-being. But again, if you make it feel as if it's a safe space for candidates to come and work for you, for candidates to apply, then it's just another way to make you stand out in this barren candidate market. So building relationships, I know that I've brushed over this quite a lot already, but I cannot emphasize enough building strong relationships with candidates, with recruiters, and just keeping in communication with everyone. And obviously having that candidate focused recruitment from the start builds those strong relationships right from the get-go, because they're going to have a positive experience. They're going to want to know and stay in contact with you. And again, if it's not the right job for them and if it's not the right time, if they truly enjoyed their experience, then they'll come back and they'll ask you for any updates. And hopefully, like I said, you'll have someone who you can always revert to in the future. So these are some ways of how you can implement different strategies to make it a candidate-focused recruitment process for you. So obviously this isn't in any order at all, but this is just, I'm not going to read off everything. I'll pick out some important ones that we tend to go for. But these are ways to just help you focus on candidate-focused recruitment. So set out everything clearly from the start. The start of it is the job description and the job specification and the advert. Make sure everything is so clear. And if anyone has any questions, obviously answer them, but you can revert them back to the job description and take it from the job description. Everything should be on there as clear as day. And in all honesty, they shouldn't have any questions, because it should be that clear, because that from the get-go, this will reduce stress completely for the candidate, and it will just keep making it an enjoyable experience for them. No surprises. You don't want to have a candidate go for an interview, not really know what's happening, not know who's on the panel, not know where they're interviewing, and then tell them on the day. that's horrible for them. They're already nervous. It's horrible for you guys. It's just not what you want. So having everything clear from the start and no surprises is very, very important. So keep them updated, like I've said, and your annual leave is not their problem. So I'll just tell you a little story that we've had recently. So in the past, we were recruiting for a specific position and we got to the interview stage and it was all going really, really well. And our client decided to go on holiday during the interview process. Now, this left the candidates obviously in the dark and not knowing what was going on for a good week or so. And in a candidate strong market where the ball is in their court, they were not there by the end of this process. And obviously the client wasn't happy. Now, if you decide to go on annual leave, you are more than entitled to that, enjoy your holiday, obviously, but think of when the time is right to recruit. If you do not have the time or have the effort or have the motivation to recruit, then it's not the time for you. And if you do decide to go on annual leave, make sure that there is someone in place who you trust enough to make decisions for you in your absence. And then another one just to touch on is obviously touch base and find a common ground. This is one of the best ways to have those relationships with your candidates. Find a common ground. Yes, small talk sometimes isn't the most enjoyable experience, but it makes them feel so much more comfortable. And small talk is definitely a way to help you find a common ground with your candidates, and they will remember you for this. So moving on then, as I mentioned, we were going to brush over safeguarding candidates' well-being. So just a few things to take into consideration, obviously, before their first couple of days, like before their start date, before their start week. This is what you need to be thinking of: how can you safeguard their well-being? So you need to ensure that your recruitment team is educated in mental health and wellness, obviously, so that they understand if the candidate and the employee has any issues whatsoever, they have a safe space and person to come to if needs be. A clear and transparent process, obviously, like I said, no surprises. Everything needs to be known from the get-go, and you need to have a clear understanding, as well as the candidate, to what they expect. And obviously, back again to culture, promote a culture of wellness to both candidate and client. And this is something that we tend to do. So obviously, if we see that there's maybe an issue in the client's work culture, then it's always best to address this. And I think as well, if you are recruiting internally for yourself, and if you can see that there's an issue, address that before the candidate comes, because you want to retain them at the end of the day. You don't want them to leave. You don't want to go through the whole recruitment process. It is long, it takes a lot of effort, but it's so rewarding at the end of the day. And to lose the candidate in the first couple of weeks because there's maybe a little tweak that you could have made in your culture, it's just not worth it. Have a look at it beforehand and make sure you've ironed out any issues before. So, like I said, create a safe space for discussion and ensure that employees know where to get help. This is essential, because if they are struggling, and obviously, as outsourced recruiters, we kind of step in as the middleman in this situation. We touch base with candidates on the first day, on the first week, and sometimes even the first month, just because if they do have any questions, if they haven't met the new employer so many times before, they've spoken to us quite a lot at this stage, we can just say to them, how are you finding it? How are you feeling it? Do you have any questions? If you don't have someone to do that for you, then it's best for you to try and do that yourself. Make time for the candidates, ensure that they're feeling comfortable, and ensure that they have a safe space to go to if they have any questions, because you don't want to leave them in the dark. And obviously, to end with, ensure that through the process, the candidate has a positive experience where they can benefit from and upskill their employability knowledge. So again, if they're not successful in the process, then at least know that you've been able to upskill them in some sort of way. You've helped with their interview skills, you've given them feedback. Feedback is so important. And in all honesty, it really helps when we give feedback from the client, and it doesn't have to be a page worth of feedback. It can just be little things that you've pulled out of interviews or you've pulled out from speaking with them that they can then take to future employers. Because at the stage of where they're waiting after the interview to hear back from you, it's horrible. It is full of stress, it's full of anxiety, and it's the worst thing ever. But then as soon as they know how they've done, then it's fine. It helps relieve any stress, and it just makes them feel a lot better knowing what they did right and maybe what they could improve on if so moving forward. So successful onboarding and avoiding burnout. So this is something to take into consideration before the start date before the first week. Have a think of what you can do. So key elements to a successful onboarding journey. Look at culture. Like I mentioned, if there's any issues, iron them out beforehand. Presenting company values, vision and culture in your job adverts when speaking to candidates, just so they can get a feel for your company and know from the start, do they want to work for you? Objectives, ensuring new starters know the expectations of their role. Don't leave them in the dark. They need to know everything from the get-go, as mentioned. Administration, completing fundamental administrative tasks, so they don't have to wait on their first day for you to fill out some forms that should have been filled out before, because on that first day, their anxiety will be very, very high, as it is for all of us on our first day of starting a new job. If you do not know what you're going into, the last thing you want to be doing is sitting in a room by yourself, staring at a wall and thinking, oh no, what have I done? Because again, you want to retain those candidates, you want to keep them there. Have it all done beforehand. Obviously, team, integrating new hires into the team and introducing them to their peers. Start the relationships from the start, from the day they start, introduce them to colleagues, maybe even introduce them on a Teams meeting before they start, just so they know faces. Make sure everyone's got their cameras on so they know familiar faces on the day that they're there, so they feel comfortable. If no one's going to go up to them, they might not feel comfortable going up to them if they've never met them before. So that's maybe a really nice way to introduce everyone beforehand. A nice little 15 minutes Teams meeting to meet the team that they're going to be working with is something that we would definitely advise on. And like I said, plan. Do not leave your new starters sitting around on the first day. I cannot think of anything worse myself than that happening. So yeah, plan ahead, definitely. And then mapping out the candidate's journey. So this is more the start date. We're now on to the start date. We're now on to the first week. What can we do to help map out their employee journey with your business? So take an initiative approach and keep them improving. Obviously start with the essentials, the start date. What do they need to do today? What are the first things? What's the most important things they're going to need to know about their role? Then continuously improve them. It doesn't need to be on the get-go. They don't need to be given targets there and then, because as Sarah mentioned, being overwhelmed is one of the main causes of stress. And if you get a new starter and say to them, this is where we need you to be in 3 months' time, and if you don't do that, then God forbid, that's just going to be horrible for them. Just give them little pieces, little bite-sized pieces that they can digest and take away from. Just have the essentials to start with. So like I said, avoid information overload. Map out content and get ideas from other teams and team leaders. Have, like I said, have people meet everyone, have the new starters meet the team that they're going to be working with, and also get opinions from different teams. Maybe someone in your business has recruited someone before you have, maybe you know an outsourced recruiter yourself. Get a bit of information from them and see how you can make sure that you retain these candidates once they've started. And then just on to transition to onboarding. So definitely take one step at a time. Do not overwhelm the candidate. That is the last thing you want to do for them. You just do not want to increase the amount of stress that they probably already have. You want to make it as enjoyable as possible. So like I said, don't set targets too soon whatsoever. Make sure that they can take it one step at a time. And I'm sure that they will enjoy the experience and want to continue working with you in the future.
Thank you, Blythe. That was brilliant. And thank you to both of our guest speakers. So that brings us to the end of today's session. If anyone's got any questions or wants to follow up on anything, you can contact us using the hello@Bhayani Law email or the hello@Bhayani Recruitment. And if anybody would like to get in touch with Adam from Health Assured or Sarah, just let me know and I can pass you their contact. Just to talk to you quickly about some other events that we've got going up as well, coming up. Just bear with me a second. So coming up, we've also got, it won't change for some reason. There we go. So we've got some events coming up. We'll send out the slides and you'll be able to find these from there. You can also find them on our website. The next one we've got coming up is HR Exchange, and that's an employment law update. So that's a really critical one. Make sure you book onto that. that'll be virtual. We've also got a variety of training sessions, both virtual and in person, if anyone's interested. Now, if anyone could take the time to leave us some feedback, that'd be really appreciated. If anyone fills out our feedback form, you can request a copy of the slides on there, or alternatively just email. And if anyone's got time, we'd really appreciate a Google review, or using review solicitors or too.